Welcome
Okay.
back to my channel. I'm Miguel Benitez, and I am on a relentless pursuit of goodness, truth, and beauty, and my channel invites you to join me in that journey. And so today I have a guest with me, Professor Scott Smith. He's professor of ethics and Christian apologetics in the MA in Christian apologetics program at Biola University. Dr. Smith is the author of and contributor to several books, including In Search of Moral Knowledge, Overcoming the Fact-Value Dichotomy, and Naturalism and Our Knowledge of Reality, Testing Religious Truth Claims. His most recent book is Exposing the Roots of Constructivism, Nominalism, and the Ontology of Knowledge. You can read more about his works and about Dr. Smith at rscottsmithphd.com, and I'll put a link to that website
Thanks.
on the video description. But
Okay.
welcome, Scott, and thank you for taking the time to join me on my channel.
Thank you for having me. Good to be with you.
Yeah, and so I was fortunate enough to have Scott Smith as my ethics professor when I was going through the apologetics program at Biola University. And so I have greatly appreciated his work and been able to continue to follow. I actually have two of his books with me here. I've got In Search of Moral Knowledge, which is a great work. And then I guess this would have been your first book, right? Truth.
Second. Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Second. So now what's really interesting about this one, and I'll just tell the listeners real briefly on this one. There's a sense in which one might have thought that this book kind of was for an age that has passed. It talks a lot about the emerging church, the emergent church. But what's interesting is we've kind of had this revival of those same ideas in what's called progressive Christianity now. And so with all the talk of deconstruction and those kinds of things, these are all things you address in this book. So I would still highly recommend this book to readers. Yeah. Okay. So when I was thinking of, as I've approached the end here of my dissertation and I wanted to relaunch my channel, because I've continued to have students subscribe and people subscribe and watch videos that I had uploaded, I knew that I wanted to address some of the issues that I've gotten to observe now that I've been able to teach full-time for a number of years now. And one of those issues is this idea that seems to float around with religion and ethics.
Yeah.
And that is, there's a lot of disagreement on these issues. There's a lot of disagreement when it comes to religion. There's a lot of disagreement when it comes to ethics. And then even in the field where I've done my work and dissertation and things like that, even in the world of art and beauty, we get a lot of disagreement, right? And the assumption then is, well, there's a lot of disagreement, so then there is no right answer or something along those lines, right? My students always seem to point out how much ethical disagreement there is among people today. And from that fact, they conclude usually one of two things. One, there are no facts of the matter when it comes to ethics. Or two, if there are facts of the matter, there's no way we can know them. They draw similar conclusions about religion. So I had Craig Hazen on a couple of weeks ago to have that discussion about religion. And then I wanted to have you on to have that discussion about ethics. And so is that the logical conclusion that one should draw from the idea that there is so much disagreement when it comes to ethics?
Well, I don't think so. You reminded me just recently about an article by a philosopher named Louis Poyman, and he has it's by various titles, but for example, ethical relativism. He used to say what's right or wrong or something like that, and I think some of that's available online. But he does a nice job of breaking down the arguments, for relativism and analyzing them. And the first one is what's called this diversity thesis. There is a fact of variation. We do differ from societies to society, and maybe even from individual to individual. And he talks about how we've kind of, come to that, come to realize some of those sort of things. But one of the things that he does, like it's real helpful, is that just from the mere fact that we do have disagreements doesn't mean that there aren't necessarily some universal, moral facts or moral truths, that we all, really know about, um, and that apply or should apply, to people. So I guess right off the bat, I question this, the assumption that there is this widespread ethical disagreement. I think we see that so much in media. We see it on our front pages of newspapers or our feeds or whatever, where there seems to be, oh, this group is, clamoring for this, but this group, opposes us so
Right.
strongly. And it seems like, oh, here we are pitted against each other.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's happening, but I think we can easily overlook there are lots of things that we do really agree upon. Uh, and that's not just within the American culture. It's, I think, could be across cultures. But for example, I think, and quite arguably, I think we could defend this, that there are some core morals that people just simply presuppose and know to be valid. Um, it could say like murder is wrong, rape is wrong, racism is wrong. That one today is just clearly known. You know? No one wants to be known as a racist. Um, um, there are things that even people who are arguing for a particular, well, there are many people who are arguing these days for that we need justice, to be done, that people should be treated with equality and dignity. Um, Now, we may disagree about exactly how those things should look, but nonetheless, they're, people who are doing this are appealing to good intuitions that I think we all widely share. There's some more we could say. We shouldn't torture innocent people, especially for the fun of it,
Right.
or babies, or get expanded. Don't torture animals, even just for the fun of it, or
Right.
don't abuse the environment. Things like that. I think there'd be a wide consensus, about some things like that. And I'm just trying to think of some things quickly off the top of my head. Um, I think there's probably more we could dig up.
Sure.
So,
No,
so
I
this
think
whole,
that's really good. So you would say first, it's kind of a false assumption to say there's all this disagreement when actually maybe we're underestimating how much
uh,
agreement there is among
uh-huh,
various cultures, people across time, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, I've been doing a lot of work on critical theory and critical race theory lately, and I've read Ibram Kendi's "How to Be an Anti-Racist," and in there he talks about forms of relativism, that tied to anti-racism, but at the same time he also comes back and talks about our common humanity, where he's trying to speak and be an anti-racist, but he's drawing upon something that, there are things here that unite us.
That's right.
So even there, and he wouldn't agree with, some different things, but nonetheless, even there, he is drawing upon common moral things that we presuppose, to be valid.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think
and
sometimes we do have. So, for example, one of the questions that I'll sometimes pose is there any truth value to the statement racism is wrong, right? Um,
mhm,
and some students, some people may say no, but
mhm,
the immediate thing they say right after is, "But I'm not a racist," right? So it's interesting that there's this need for clarification, even though so I think sometimes maybe we're a little inconsistent there in
sure,
wanting to say, "No, no, there's no truth value there." But to be clear, I'm not one of those. And so
right,
I think it reveals that we do know. We have these
yeah.
very, very strong moral intuitions that being racist, there's something fundamentally wrong about that.
When I was at USC, getting my PhD, I had a chance to teach the freshman writing courses, and we can bring up our own topics, and they encourage ethical topics. So I did. And I brought in, this kind of, thing for them to think about. Well, we were always linked to a related social issues class. And one semester, I was linked to one that was studying the Holocaust. So it was designed for us then to draw themes from that and have them write about that. And in that class, because what they were exposed to in that Holocaust class, more than any other that I had, that class just clearly saw that what the Nazis were doing, to Jews, homosexuals, whoever, was just incredibly clearly wrong. There was no dispute in that group. On the other hand, one time I remember teaching another class, and just about everybody in there, was, I think, agreeing, oh, that was wrong. But there was one young lady who spoke up, and there says, well, I don't know if what they thought was right for them, that was okay for them. But it was very tentatively said, too. And, um, so it was a really hard pill to swallow, I think, even for her,
Yeah.
to make that kind of claim.
Right.
Because here we are confronted, with just clear examples, of immoral behavior. Yeah.
So then I'm curious, because you've done some study as far as kind of the history of ideas when it comes to these things. So why do you think that many in our society are kind of tempted to conclude that disagreement about ethics suggests there's no correct answer when it comes to ethics? Why do we kind of make that leap? And I clarify history of ideas just because we always want to be careful not to psychologize people, right? And so, but what are maybe some of those motivations, that lead us to draw those conclusions?
Well, referring back to what Lewis Poyman, mentioned, just we started getting exposed several decades ago to anthropologists, studies, of different cultures. Margaret Mead, and other people, and the things that they found, and it's like, oh, these people over here, for example, in this, area we hadn't really, studied before. It's like, it looks like they practice cannibalism. How could they, really uphold, dignity of human values, these sort of things. Um, so part of it, I think, is, getting exposed, to different cultures. Another one that Poyman points out, I think, was that Eskimos, would tend to, or that's the improper term. Native, help me with that. Can you think of that
Yeah,
term?
yeah,
Um,
I know. I'm not sure exactly
yeah.
the correct.
Um,
Yeah, but he uses that term. He uses the term Eskimo.
yes. They would put their elderly on an ice, a chunk of ice, and send them off, into the distance. And it's like, to us, it'd be like, how are you treating that person, in any sort of dignified, respectful way? But it turns out that it says, on the surface, it looked like, there's a disagreement here in moral principles, but actually, maybe there was a disagreement in secondary ones in terms of how we would show like respect or honor, to our elders. And this was a way that they, showed respect, to them. Um, Questions, should they do that way? Well, okay, we could ask that, but nonetheless, that's how they did it. I like watching some K dramas, for example, and how respect for elders is shown there is different than perhaps would be here, in the United States or other places too, and vice versa. So that's part of it. Some of it, though, is the ideas. Um, I remember reading a book from the 1980s. It was The Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom. And even then, he said one of the default assumptions he knew he could find, expect his students to have is to think that everything's relative. So these ideas have been with us for quite a while. And part of that, I think, is because, back in the late 1700s, even, there was this idea came about called the fact-value split. Um, the idea that somehow science is the set of disciplines that could really give us knowledge, the way things really are of the facts. But things like religion and ethics are just personal opinions, uh, not things we could really know. And I think that was related to several factors. Part of it was because of a shift. I thinking of David Hume and some of his ideas that really morality is a matter of our sentiments, and strong feelings. That's what really move us to action. Uh, and people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, as well. Uh, it's not by looking, outside of us to find some uh, moral principles, that are standard for all, maybe as societies, come up with or that exist objectively. Instead, I'm to look within, into my deep inward feelings even. And that's where I find, what's really true, authentic, for me. And I think there's more, we could look at too. Part of it, even predating those guys, is the scientific revolution, how it started. And it started a big shift in terms of what we think is real. There was a shift toward what became known as, or what was known as mechanical atomism, uh, away from a view that we are a body and soul, material and immaterial combination. And everything then in creation is viewed more as mechanisms, as machines made up ultimately of atoms. So we are material things. Well, if that's the case, the way that we really know those sort of things is by five senses, empirical means. Science uses that sort of stuff. So that's the stuff that's really real. So science gets this growing prestige. It's the set of disciplines that enable us to know these things. But morals, you know, what are they, on this view? And they become starting to get relegated along with other sort of things to these what were called secondary qualities, or they're just subjective, maybe our strong feelings, or maybe just words we use, even for different things. So that's some ways that some of those ideas, I think, have evolved.
Okay. Yeah.
Why?
Very good. Okay, so you had mentioned just a moment ago about the fact-value split.
Mhm.
What is the fact-value split? Can you go over that again?
Yeah, it's basically a mindset that we've inherited now for, since the late 1700s or so, that science is the set of disciplines that somehow uniquely gives us knowledge of the facts of reality. Whereas things like ethics and religion, or maybe even the humanities, perhaps, really just give us opinions and preferences, maybe just interpretations, our own values, that sort of stuff. Um, and this came about through a big series of change of ideas, but a big part of it was from shifts leading into it from the scientific revolution. A view that really what's real is just a bunch of atoms, in certain arrangements, so that we are mechanisms. But one of the problems with morals on that sort of view is, you might want to ask, well, what kind of thing are they then? Leading up to that kind of time, a lot of people for quite a long time seemed to think that morals were really these things that are real whether or not we believe they're there. They're mind independent or objective. They transcend us in the sense that they're not human products. Um, so they're and they have some sort of nature or essence to them. So an act of murder. I like to use the definition that it's the intentional taking of an innocent human life. That is essentially wrong. There's a nature to it. Justice is essentially good, just due to what justice is and due to the kind of things we are. So there are natures to those things on these older views. And as we go along, the idea though, when to think that we're nothing but, made of matter, it's like how do essences or natures fit into that? And that's what Darwin really, helped get away, do away with. there's no need for those sort of things anymore, and they don't fit if everything's just material. So a large part of this then is, I think, the fact value split came as a result of a long line of views in which there were shifts in the view of what was real and how we can know it. And so morals, started to be thought to be, instead of having an essence to them, they thought, we're thinking that these are just our products. These are just particular things that we have come up with. And so we have been taught this for a long, long time now. So it's coming out in all sorts of different ways.
Right.
Um,
So when thinking about the fact value split, just for maybe those who aren't as familiar with it,
mhm.
so when we're talking about morals, when we're talking about ethics, we're talking in the category of values, and that ends up
Okay.
right? Is
Yeah.
that the way we should understand it? And that's
Okay.
separate, that's distinct from facts, which are the things usually people would say that we can encounter through our senses, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So this is where we end up in a society where scientists are seen really as kind of the experts that give us knowledge.
Yeah.
And all the
Right.
other stuff is just kind of people arguing about things, right? But
Yeah.
that's kind of so I give the example in my classes that science might be able to tell you the efficacy of wearing a mask, right? With
Okay.
the virus, right? But
Right.
it cannot speak to whether or not you ought to wear one. And so the question is there an oughtness to even talk about, or is that just a matter of opinion? But when we're talking about the fact value split, those values end up largely just being a matter of opinion, right?
And oughtness in particular there is if I have an obligation to protect you as well as myself,
Right.
from
Right.
picking up COVID or
Right.
some other
Or
bug.
whatever else. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So that distinction is, and I find it to be a super helpful one, although I think it's problematic, right? But I find it to be a helpful one of understanding where we are today. The
Yes. Oh,
idea is
yes.
science gives us facts. The other
Hmm.
stuff is, I think it's Nancy Pearcey, and I think she's doing it through Schaefer, but kind of the
Hmm.
two stories, right? You've
Yeah.
got the bottom story of the facts, science,
Yeah.
and math, right? And then you've got the upper story, which is ethics and morality and aesthetics and
Yeah.
religion, maybe, right? All
Yeah.
those things get thrown up there, and those are just areas where people disagree.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and I do find it interesting, even at kind of like a practical level, because if you think about it, like, you can't teach a science class with a 50-year-old textbook. You
Yeah.
can't, because a lot of it would be wrong, right?
Right.
Like, so it's just a little odd that we've decided this is where we really know the truth. And I'm not
Yeah.
anti-science. Science
Yeah.
is a
Me too.
great
Yeah.
tool, right?
Right.
I'm thankful for what we accomplished
Oh,
through the
me
means
too.
of science, right? So that's not my point at all, but
Right.
rather it's the idea that we've come to believe that this is kind of where the facts come in. And and I think most scientists would admit science is provisional. It is constantly changing and evolving. So I
That's
always
right.
tell my humanities students, your science professor can't teach from a 50-year-old text, but I can teach you about ethics with a text that's 1,000 years old. You know what I like? So there's something there to at least consider,
That's a nice way of putting it. That's a
Yeah.
very good point. Yeah.
So you've indicated some good reasons for why we should at least question
Hmm.
this kind of split, right? These strong intuitions.
Okay.
So I know one of the questions that oftentimes comes up to me is, okay, well, if that's not the way it is, if our large amount of disagreement about ethical issues is not an indication that ethics is ultimately just subjective or
Hmm.
person dependent, right, mind dependent, then why should we think, right, that moral knowledge is possible? Like, why should we have confidence that even if there is such a thing as right and wrong, that we
Mhm.
could actually come to know it?
Well, um, I think let me go back and just reiterate something I mentioned before, and that is um, it, it's one thing I think to say, well, look, there are some core morals I think we do know, and I think that's very important. Um, but what that does is it helps indicate that the fact value split is wrong.
Right.
There are some things that we really do know already. Now, now the question is, well, there may be two questions. One of them might be, well, are there more, such morals that we could know? The other question might be, well, what kind of thing are these? Because we got all sorts of different views that try to explain the nature of morals. I've mentioned some of them saying that they are just products of evolution. They're just things that we've come up with as a society. They're my things I accept as true for me. Maybe they really exist objectively and transcend us. What are they? What's the best explanation? And one thing I try to do in that a theme running through that In Search of Moral Knowledge book is that um, if you look at the history of ethics, at least in the West, I think we'd find this, also the case with other, geographical areas too. But uh, these various kinds of alternative explanations uh, that I just mentioned, I don't think at the end of the day can they can preserve those core morals that we know are true. Uh, it, how about justice is good? Well, what if we evolve differently?
Right.
you know, or what if we happen to come, into a society? I mean, it's conceivable. What if we came into a society that says no, to that? We're not going to, accept that as good, or dignity of all humans. Oh, come on, whatever. So there's some things here that I don't think these all different alternative views, and I try to explain why in that book. And I've got some blogs on my website that go through this too. But I don't think those alternative views can really do justice or preserve these core morals that we all know, that even like the critical theorists are banking on, to be true. But what is the best explanation? And what I come down to in the book, I try to argue against all these different ones, but the one I think is the best explanation is that they really are objectively real, that they transcend us. Now you might say, well, how on, what's the best explanation for that then? And I come down to basically two. In the history of ethics, one is by Plato. Um, he offers a view in which there are these things he calls forms or universals. Um, and yet one of the problems with his kind of view is like, well, okay, these forms, these principles are, just happen to exist. But what's the connection to me? Why should I be just, or why should I tell the truth, or these sort of things? And the other thing is when we violate those sort of things, usually it's what we end up feeling guilt or shame in the presence of a person, not some abstract, principle. I think a far better explanation is that they're grounded in God, uh, and God's very character as the best explanation. And if that's the case, then maybe God has revealed more such morals, that we could know, too. So part of what I think is that I can then go on and say, well, which God and which one has the best evidence for it, and
Right.
has God revealed more to us? And I think He has. And as a Christian, I think that's in Scripture.
Okay, so I could see a question coming up
Okay.
though.
Okay.
A lot is based on these moral intuitions that most of us tend to have.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that it's wrong to needlessly take an innocent life, right? Like,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
okay, so that's morally wrong. But people do that sort of thing, right? And so I could just see someone saying, okay, we're appealing to people's intuitions, but then what about competing intuitions, right? Wouldn't competing, if a kind of general consensus of intuitions is being appealed to for knowledge, wouldn't the idea that there's competing into moral intuitions be an indication that there aren't actual moral principles that are universal?
Well, I guess what I'm tempted to say to that, at least off the top of my head,
Sure.
uh, is that some of these come back to some of these real core, moral ones, especially ones that are really hot button issues, in society today. Everyone should be treated with dignity. Everyone should be treated with justice, equality, these sort of things. Are we really going to find that we have such deeply competing intuitions, about those things? We may have a disagreement about what justice would look like,
Right. Right.
for this particular case. But still, that justice should be done. No, I don't. So, like we said with Poyman, his point was that it seemed like there is this deep agreement, deep, widespread agreement upon um, core morals, that we do know that we're entitled to say we know these things. Um, on the other hand, there could be a difference in secondary principles of what really counts,
Right.
as that, like with the, I gave that example about sending off the elderly on the ice floe or other ways.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'm not so sure that really undermines,
Right.
that. Yes.
Right.
And the other just quick thing to say is that, um, there's something, we can't always appeal to some other criteria by which we know things. At some point, we simply have to stop, a potential of what's called a regress of, well, I know this because of this. Well, how do you know that? Well, because of this. Well, how do you know that? You never get going anywhere. There's some things we simply know. And that's what I'm appealing to here. This is called particularism in epistemology. And I think that's very much the case here, with some of these core morals. Not just, so I don't want to sidestep the importance of that by simply saying I'm appealing to intuitions here.
Right.
Because intuitions can be shaped by different things, but there are some things it seems we simply know. And that's more my
Okay.
point, I think.
That's good. That's good. I think that's a good clarification.
Okay.
That it is this something that is kind of immediately known. Is that
Yeah.
fair? Yeah.
Hmm.
So okay.
Exactly.
Good. No, that's really helpful. And so then the disagreements come in what might be proper application, where we draw the line. So, for
Hmm.
example, one might rightly criticize the authors of the Declaration of Independence, right?
Okay.
All men are created equal, but
Hmm.
maybe they didn't apply that the way that it ought to
Yes.
be applied. And so we want to have
Right.
that discussion. So
Yes.
the general principle that yes, we all have been created equal. There is this
Hmm.
equality across human beings.
Hmm.
Some in some circumstances that's not being applied consistently. And so we want to then have
Exactly.
that moral discussion on this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that could lead into discussions of, well, why? Oh, because you're being hypocrites. It's a power
Right.
move. But
Right.
we're coming back and still agreeing about something
That's right. Yeah.
deeply moral.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I have found this to be very helpful, and I appreciate again you spending the time with me.
Oh, it's been great to be with you.
Yeah, excellent. All right. So hopefully you found this helpful as well. If you're still with us, please make sure to like and subscribe and share. And again, I'll be putting down below links to Dr. Smith's books as well as his website where he does post several blog articles that do discuss some of these things as well as some of the other things we briefly mentioned like deconstruction and critical race theory and those sorts of things. He has blog
Yeah.
posts on those as well. So, all right.
Yeah.
Thanks again.